So today we're going to have our talks over tea with the Huntington Historical Society's curator, Emily Werner. She's going to talk about what she does here, as a lot of people are very curious to what a curator does, what her role is. Thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate your support of the Huntington Historical Society. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and I would ask that everyone turns off their camera for now and mutes themselves, just so that during her presentation, we don't have any, echoing or dogs barking or things like that going on. And once her presentation is over, we can take questions, or if you have a question as we go along, it would be great to put it in the chat. And if anyone's new, on the bottom of your screen, there should be a little chat box. Or if you're not comfortable with technology, you can just write it down, and then, when we get to the end, you can read your question to us. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Emily now, and we're going to get started.
Okay, great. So thank you guys all for coming today. I had the idea to do this presentation last year because I often get a lot of confused questions when I tell people that I'm the curator and collections manager. So I thought it'd be really interesting to give kind of a behind the scenes peek at what my job is and how our collection got started, how our organization got started, and what it takes to preserve our history. So like Stephanie said, if you have any questions, we can discuss them at the end. So it might seem kind of basic, but I think it'll be a helpful way to start our discussion by defining what a museum is. So in 1996, the Museum and Libraries Services Act defined a museum as a, quote, public or private nonprofit agency or institution organized on a permanent basis for essentially educational or aesthetic purposes that utilizes a professional staff, owns or utilizes tangible objects, cares for the tangible objects, and exhibits the tangible objects to the public on a regular basis. According to the National Park Service, museums collect, preserve, study, interpret, and provide appropriate public access to natural and cultural materials that have been assembled according to a plan. Oops. So a museum's three primary responsibilities include collecting and documenting the resulting collection, preserving the collection and its associated data, and providing for collection access, use, and interpretation. As the curator and collections manager, I'm responsible for these things as they apply to our collection of three-dimensional objects, while our archivist, Karen Martin, oversees everything relating to our archival collection, which includes primarily paper-based objects like books, periodicals, manuscripts, maps, photographs, and more. In larger museums, you might have multiple people who each handle specific parts of these responsibilities. But in a small museum or historical society like ours, we all do a little bit of everything. Everyone from our director to our volunteers help this organization fulfill these missions. So our organization dates back to 1903 and the 250th anniversary of the founding of Huntington. If you visited the Founding Mothers exhibit last year, you may have learned a little bit about the start of our collections and the founding of the Huntington Historical Society, but I'll tell you a little bit more about it now too. So in 1903, the town formed an association to organize extensive plans for the three-day celebration. There were parades, entertainment, exhibits, speeches of men of renown, like President Theodore Roosevelt, and even a colonial ball at the Huntington Opera House, with guests expected to dress in, quote, ye olden times apparel, end quote. The town also formed a colonial women's committee, seen on the right, to plan a meal for the visiting dignitaries, to be served in the style of George Washington when he visited Huntington during his tour of Long Island in 1790. The Colonial Women's Committee also organized an exhibit of all things, quote, colonial, with artifacts loaned by local families to be displayed in 5 rooms at the St. John's Parish House. The colonial exhibit was originally scheduled only for Saturday, July 4th, but was so popular that it was extended for another 2 days, and over 2,000 people attended. In addition to the dinner and exhibit, the committee also wanted to form a, quote, organization for the collection and preservation of articles used by the early settlers and founders of the town of Huntington, end quote. After the celebration, the artifacts that were not reclaimed became the foundation of the society's permanent collection. They were temporarily stored at the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Building, while members of the committee, led by Elizabeth Samus, met to formally organize the society over the following months. Eventually, they secured the Conklin House at 2 High Street as the Society's headquarters. So over the past 120 years, we have accumulated upwards of 10,000 objects, including fine arts, pottery, furniture, commemorative objects, tools, textiles, clothing, and accessories, in addition to thousands of paper documents, photographs, ephemera, and more in our archives. We continue to accept new objects into the collection each year. The collection is divided into objects and archives because different types of objects require different storage environments, organizational systems, and specialized knowledge to care for them. Generally, early historical societies and museums accepted almost anything in order to build up a collection. This process resulted in lots of duplicate objects, things in poor condition, or things not specifically associated with the museum's collecting scope. Now, obviously, I wasn't there when they began collecting the objects for our collection, so I can't say exactly why things were added or if anything was ever rejected. At this point, over 120 years in, we have added to the collection. We have limited storage space for accepting new objects, and nowadays we try to be more discerning when accepting donations to ensure they fit into our collecting scope. As we collect today, we try to fill in gaps in our collection whenever we can. Many of the early accessions are tied to a sense of heritage shared by the founding members, representing a limited portion of the town's contemporary demographic. Today, we aim to tell a more complete version of Huntington's history, both by collecting a broader scope of objects, as well as considering objects already in our collection from new perspectives. While occasionally we buy things for the collection, more often or not, we rely on donations. When we are approached with a potential donation, I usually ask for photographs so that I can show our collections committee. I try to avoid having people bring objects to us before we've made a decision, as they can take up precious room and then people have to make another trip to come back if we don't accept it. The collections committee is made up of staff, board members, and volunteers who are knowledgeable about the collection and the museum's collecting scope and town history. Together, we determine whether the proposed donation should be accessioned or not. Accessioning is the formal process of adding an object to the collection. It involves the transfer of ownership from the donor to the Historical Society, photographing and fully cataloging the object, and adding the information to our database. The most important thing we discuss regarding proposed donations include: what is its connection to Huntington? Do we know who made it, who owned it, who used it? Did they live locally? Do we already have similar objects in the collection? What condition is it in? How can we use it in an exhibit? It was common for early donations to be accepted with very little information recorded, which can make it challenging today to uncover its significance or connection to the town's history. Here is a page showing early accessions from our first logbook. Sometimes I read the single line of writing that describes an object, for instance, accession number 1225, which just says, quote, bridal veil, end quote. And I want to reach back in time and ask the donor more questions, like who wore it, when did they get married, where did they buy it, did they make it? So now when we consider objects, we like to get the full picture and ask the people associated with it any and all questions about its history and provenance to record with the donation. We record fuller descriptions in the logbook and extensive descriptions in our database. I was always taught that the description should be enough that if a similar group of objects were all placed on a table, you would be able to differentiate it and pick out the one you're looking for. So I'd like to share an example of a recent donation that we accepted and the thought process behind it. Last year, we were offered a collection of 5 late 19th century quilts made by members of the Carl family. Now, we already have an extensive quilt collection, so there was an argument for not accepting any more, but there were several things in their favor. First, the donor had had the quilts appraised, so each one had a write-up with a full description of the pattern and date and a note of who made it. The Carl family is an old Huntington family, and the donor also provided a family tree showing the connection between the makers of each of these quilts. Finally, they were all in great condition as they were primarily show quilts and not used much. So weighing all of these factors, we decided that it was worthwhile accepting them into the collection. Some things that we have been offered but have not accepted since I've been here are things like a parlor organ, a potbelly stove, and a commercial sewing machine. These are mostly larger things that we just don't have the room for, unfortunately. Sometimes people offer us objects that we can't keep for the collection, but the donor allows us to sell at either the Antiques in April fair or the antique shop. We only sell these proposed donations with prior written approval of the donor. Whenever we sell an object, the money goes towards preserving our collection. The Collections Committee also discusses potential deaccessions. Deaccessioning is the process of removing objects from the collection that have been previously accessioned. It can be a tricky subject to discuss because I think sometimes when we say deaccession, people think we just get rid of objects if we want more money for ourselves, which is not the case at all. We take our responsibility to care for the objects entrusted to us very seriously. But we also have to think logically. We have limited space, time, money, and resources to care for the collection, so occasionally we deaccession things. But it really only happens in the following circumstances. 1, objects are in too poor condition to be able to exhibit and there's no way of fixing them. 2, objects were accepted long ago and don't relate closely enough to Huntington's history. 3, objects would fit better into another institution's collection. 4, if we have a lot of duplicates of the same object or type of object, and it doesn't make sense for us to have so many. In that case, we may choose to keep ones that are in better condition or have a known donor, and deaccession ones that are in poor condition or have no recorded donor. Things that are deaccessioned are usually things that were accepted long ago, before our collection scope was fully defined. We wouldn't really accession something one year and turn around and sell it the following year. Things like the donor, the rarity, and the significance to Huntington's history are all carefully considered when deaccessioning objects. Objects are either sold with the money going towards supporting the continued maintenance and preservation of the collection, or they can be transferred to another institution where it fits better. In some cases, where the object is deaccessioned due to poor condition, we dispose of it, but this is rare. For instance, last year we deaccessioned a leather hat box. It was donated along with the top hat inside. The hat was worn by a Mr. Russell Samus around 1890. Unfortunately, the hat box had developed red rot, which is a type of leather deterioration that commonly affects vegetable tan leathers from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It causes the leather to disintegrate into a red powder, and there's not really a way to reverse the process. Since we considered the hat to be the primary part of this donation, we felt it was okay to dispose of the damaged hat box. We have good photographs of it, if that would benefit someone's research in the future. We also deaccessioned a lot of lace fragments last year, like this one here. It had no recorded donor, and we have lots of bigger and better examples of this technique in the collection already. Pieces like these are bundled together and sold at Antiques in April. So once we decide that we would like to add an object to the collection, the next step is to document it and add it to the database. We use a database system called Past Perfect, which looks like this. Before computer databases, we use bound accession books with handwritten records and various systems of handwritten and typewritten index cards. Past Perfect like this is a web-based database service that allows us to log in and access our collection information from any computer or phone. This is an especially useful feature since our collection is scattered between 4 different buildings: the Conklin House, the Kassam House, our museum in the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Building, and the Trade School, which houses our offices and archives. We recently upgraded from a desktop-based Past Perfect, which we can only access from specific computers. Last year, I worked for several months to clean up our data and prepare it for the transfer to the new system. So I thought I would just walk you through this screen and what all the information is and what it means. This is part of the database screen for the first object officially added to our collection, which is a table that George Washington dined at during his Long Island tour in 1790. So the first thing listed is what collection the object belongs to. These are kind of like subcategories that help us organize the collection better. We can make whatever collection categories we want that will be helpful to us. So you'll see that this table is in the furniture collection. Some of the other collection categories that we use are advertising, ceramics, costume, farm equipment, fine arts, heating devices and accessories, household accessories, military gear and accessories, textiles, tools, toys and games, and more. A few collections are named for the person or people who donated them, but we only do this if they donated a large number of objects at once and it makes sense to organize them that way. For example, we have the Bransima family collection, which is a multi-generational collection of over 100 objects from the local family, or the Carrie Brown collection, which is a collection of pottery and Brown Brothers related ephemera from one of their descendants. The next 2 pieces of information are the object ID and accession number. which are sometimes the same and sometimes not, depending on when the object was accessioned. Originally, each object added to the collection was given a single number, starting with 1 and going all the way into the 2000s. So this table, as the first object officially added, was given number 1. Eventually, the museum industry invented standardized ways of numbering objects, which was adopted here in the 1960s. Since then, all accessions start with the 4-digit year the object was accessioned, followed by a period, followed by a number that indicates which donation the object was a part of, followed by a period, and a final number that indicates which object in the donation it is. So for instance, the Carl family quilts on the previous slide were numbered 2023.45.1 through 2023.45.5. So that means that the donation was accessioned in 2023. It was the 45th donation we accepted that year, and there were 5 objects in the donation, each numbered 1 through 5. So in that case, the accession number is 2023.45, but the object number or object ID has an additional digit to differentiate each object. But anyway, the earlier accessions are just single numbers preceded by 4 zeros so that they could fit the database system's parameters. The old number section is just a place for us to record that in some places, like old meeting minutes, this table may be referred to as just 1 rather than 0000.1. The next piece of information is the object name. Past Perfect uses a lexicon system that includes almost 15,000 standardized object names with different classification categories. So each time we add an object to the database, we have to choose a name that fits into one of the accepted object names. So this object is a dining table, but it is entered as table, dining. Listing the main type of object and then a descriptive feature allows us to organize similar types of objects together, such as table, card, table, coffee, or table, examination. It's a little backwards at first, but it's helpful once you get used to entering things like that. Title is really just for objects like paintings or books or other fine arts objects that may have been given a specific title by the artist or author or other creator. It's not necessary in this case. Status allows us to keep track of different activities relating to the object's care. For example, if an object is currently at the conservator, if it needs conservation, if it's missing, or if it's on loan somewhere. Source is where we got the object from. It lists the name of the donor or indicates whether the object was donated, purchased, or found in the collection without any other information. Catalog date and cataloged by indicate when the object was added to the database and by whom. The date and year range are obviously helpful tools for knowing the objects in the collection. Sometimes they are slightly different and using one is more specific than the other, but I like to fill out each so that I can search and organize my results in different ways. Having a photo of the object is so helpful when I'm trying to research it or trying to put together an exhibit. There's only so much information you can get from a written description. In the past few years, it's become so easy to snap a picture on my phone, airdrop it to my computer, and upload it to Past Perfect. In the past, it took quite a few more steps to get those pictures into the database, so right now I'm constantly snapping new pictures of objects to add. I think that the location is the most important information stored in Past Perfect. It does us no good if we don't know where our objects are. Every time an object is moved, whether it's put on exhibit or on loan or switched to a different box, the change has to be updated on Past Perfect. Unfortunately, there are still so many objects on Past Perfect without a current location. We have had a computerized database system for a little over 20 years, but we are still working on getting all of the handwritten records from the past 120 years onto the computer. So sometimes the record gets added before an object has been located or before a record of that location has been found. We have standardized names and shorthand names for each of the buildings and rooms within them. In this case, CH Colonial Room means that the table is in the Colonial Room in the Conklin House. Smaller objects in storage in the vault may also have an aisle number, shelf number, and/or box number to help locate them. And finally, here is a description. This section contains a physical description of the object, along with pertinent history on the maker, the style, its provenance, or other key information about the object. I try to put as many key words in the description as possible, so that the object would appear in searches if I was looking for things like George Washington, Hepplewhite-style furniture, Zebulon Ketchum, or even just the Ketchum family. There's also a place in Past Perfect to identify people or subjects associated with each object. Our volunteer Penny has been helping to populate that field in Past Perfect to improve the searchability of our records. Right now, this database is only available to staff and volunteers that are helping with specific projects. It's one of my personal goals, and I think our organization's goals, to one day get some of these object records online so that anyone can search through our collections from home and see what we have. That dream is still a few years away, but we're getting closer every day. So that's just a quick overview of some of the information contained in Past Perfect. This first page here holds the primary information about each object. There are other fields like dimensions, appraisal information, condition, other notes, and more that can be filled in if applicable or if there's time. In addition to the computer records, we do still keep paper records for all of our objects. We still fill out new logbook entries by hand, and I have many file cabinets in my office full of paperwork relating to each object. The files contain all sorts of things, like correspondence between us and the donor, research conducted on the object, photographs, and the deed of gift, which is the piece of paper that formally transfers ownership of the object to the society. By thoroughly documenting and cataloging each object, we can easily determine what we have, where it is, and in what condition, and how it came to be part of the collection. Keeping this information readily accessible helps us to make prudent decisions regarding the care of our collection. Cataloging and documenting objects on Past Perfect is all about recording everything we know about the object in one place. I catalog all new accessions, and I also go back through old accessions almost every day to correct or add more information as I come across it. Cataloging can sometimes be challenging. I have my own areas of specialties, like fashion and textiles, and a basic knowledge of a lot of objects, but there's still a lot I don't know. We have a great collection of reference books in the archives that I can check out, as well as online resources like historic newspaper sites and Ancestry.com to research the makers or owners of objects. I also reach out to people with other areas of specialty, like Toby with furniture or pottery, for instance, to help with writing descriptions. We had a volunteer a few years ago named Philip, who was very knowledgeable about military history and wrote extensive descriptions and designed new storage for our collection of antique guns. We are a small team here, and I'm thankful for connecting with people who can help us in areas that we know less about. I'm also thankful for our volunteers who help out our small staff with projects that we don't always have as much time as we'd like to work on. Here you can see some of the volunteers who work with the costume collection, who for many years have called themselves the Ladies of the Attic, since the majority of our costumes are stored in the attic of the Kassam house. They started a project last year to photograph our costume collection. This really is at least a 3-person job, and you can see Robin dressing and photographing the mannequin, Kathy recording information about the costume and its condition, and Lillian reboxing everything. Up until recently, only a small portion of our costume collection was photographed and on the database. We never had a computer or Wi-Fi in the Kassam house until recently, so we relied mainly on paper records there. With their help, and with the help of our Archives and Collections associate, Dory Jo, I've been able to get a lot of those records entered onto the database. Like I said, I think that having photos and a current location of our objects is the most important thing, so I'm really thankful that they've taken on this task. One of my favorite parts of this job is that I feel like I learn something new every day. I'm always finding out new things about our collection and making new connections between objects and events from our town's history. For instance, you may wonder why I have these 3 particular objects up on the screen. A few weeks ago, I discovered they are all connected. They were all donated by different people, and nothing in their descriptions mentioned the others, but I discovered an interesting connection while searching for more information about the silhouette on the left. The reason that I could even begin to research more information is because the donor helpfully included a note on the back of the frame when she donated it to us. It reads, quote, "Silhouette of Ira Johnson, son of Alexander and Ann Johnson, given by his cousin, Miss Ida A. Johnson," end quote. Now that's already way more information than we have about some of the other objects in our collection, but I still wanted to know more. By searching those names on Ancestry.com, I discovered that Ira S. Johnson was born in Huntington on January 11th, 1835, to Alexander S. Johnson, a merchant, and Ann Jarvis Johnson. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 14 on August 11th, 1849, and is buried in the Huntington Rural Cemetery with his family. Once I had those dates, I could more accurately date the silhouette, which must have been made during his life between 1835 and 1849, probably somewhere in the early 1840s. I thought that that was as far as I would get, but I noticed other names in the family tree, and saw that Ira's sister, Frances Johnson, was the second wife of Frederick J. Kerr, who ran a Huntington pottery from 1854 to 1863, before the Brown brothers took over. So here's one of the many examples of Kerr pottery that we have in the collection. A week or so later, I came across this bodice in our collection. The logbook said that it was a white waist or bodice, and there was a note that said it was the wedding bodice of Miss Ann Johnson and was donated by Augusta Johnson, her daughter. When I went to research these names on Ancestry, it appeared that I had viewed those same census records recently. I wondered why until I clicked on the link and recognized Ira and Frances's names. It turns out that Ann Johnson was their mother. She was born Ann Jarvis on February 13th, 1811, to Jacob Jarvis and Nancy Udall. She married Alexander S. Johnson, probably in the late 1830s, and had several children, including Ira, Frances, and Ann Augusta, the donor of this bodice. Ann Augusta never married, and when she was older, she lived with her cousin Ida, who donated the silhouette of Ira. So it all just comes back around in one big circle. I've put all this information into the database and indicated that these records are connected. So if someone wants to research this family or use these objects in a future exhibit, all of that information will be right there. So the point of all this is that not only is preserving the physical objects important, but also preserving and in some cases recovering the stories associated with them. Without these stories, this is just a nice silhouette, an old bodice, and a piece of pottery. These are just 3 miscellaneous objects that you could maybe find in an antique store. They're very nice objects, true, but the stories are what is really important to us here at the Historical Society. So the way that we keep objects connected to their data and stories is by numbering them. Most people don't see these numbers because we try to put them in an inconspicuous place. So here you'll see some of the different ways that we attach numbers to objects. Some objects, like wood, ceramic, metal, or other hard surfaces, have their numbers painted on them. We use red paint so that it is easily identifiable from any other markings. The red paint is sandwiched between a layer of clear lacquer that prevents the paint from bleeding onto the object and can be removed if necessary. Textiles and costumes usually have their number written on a cotton label that is then sewn to a corner or another inconspicuous place. Here's a 1970s Girl Scout uniform we recently received, and I sewed the tag on the back of the sash behind one of the badges so stitches aren't visible from the other side. If there isn't a good way to paint or sew a number on, we can write the information on an archival hang tag. This is useful for large paintings or ones with elaborate frames. For paper-based objects, like the candy box in the middle bottom, we can lightly write the number in pencil. And for small objects where we can't really paint a number on or attach a tag to, we can place it in an archival bag with the number written on a card inside, like this wax steel stamp. So once the objects are accessioned, cataloged in past perfect, photographed, and labeled with their number, we have to determine the safest way to store them so that they will last for future generations to study and enjoy. Sometimes people ask me when they donate something whether it will go on permanent display in our museum. That answer is no, but not because we don't want people to see the wonderful object they've donated to our collection, but rather because we care about the safety of that object, and also because we just don't have the space to put everything on permanent display in our small museum. At any given time, a majority of a museum's collections are likely in storage because that is the safest place for them. Over time, all objects will begin to deteriorate for a variety of reasons. But proper storage situations, handling techniques, and limited exhibition time can slow down that deterioration, allowing objects to last longer. So a big part of my job is the preventive care or preventive conservation of the objects in our collection, which means avoiding, blocking, or minimizing the agents of deterioration. Agents of deterioration is a fancy term for forces that act on objects and cause chemical or physical changes. They include direct physical forces like shock, vibration, or abrasion that can break, distort, puncture, dent, or scratch objects. It can come from something as simple as improper handling or a catastrophic event like an earthquake or the shelf collapsing. Fire can destroy, embrittle, scorch, or cause smoke damage to objects. Water can cause stains, swelling, corrosion, and more. Pests, like bugs or mice, can eat, cut, excrete on, destroy, weaken, or disfigure organic materials. liquid, gas, or solid contaminants like pollution, grease, dust, soot that can disintegrate, discolor, or corrode objects. High levels of both UV and visible light can disintegrate, fade, darken, or yellow the outer layer of objects. Incorrect temperature is an issue. When temperatures are too high or too low, it can cause gradual disintegration, discoloration, or embrittlement. Temperature fluctuations can cause fractures. Incorrect relative humidity is also an issue. Too high humidity, over 65%, can cause dampness, which can cause mold or corrosion. Too low humidity can cause cracking and embrittlement, and fluctuations can shrink and swell organic materials, causing stress and strains. So as the curator and collections manager, I need to be able to identify the causes and symptoms of object deterioration. I keep a close eye on the collection and monitor and control the museum environment, including the relative humidity, temperature, light, pests, dust, and other pollutants. And I practice proper techniques for the handling, storing, and exhibiting of objects. I ensure appropriate security and fire protection. Damage is cumulative and causes irreversible losses to objects over time, so we want to try to stay on top of it. As I go through the objects, I make note of their condition and adjust things when I can. But even with constant monitoring, some objects are inherently unstable or have deteriorated too far to be salvaged with preventive care. Some objects are subject to inherent vice, which is the propensity of certain materials to deteriorate because of their internal characteristics, incompatibility of materials, poor quality, or unstable materials. Some examples of objects frequently subject to inherent vice are newspapers, which are acidic, or heavily beaded garments, or sometimes even objects with unstable dyes. Most objects are not created with long-term preservation in mind. You can see this dress here has tears in the sheer silk chiffon due to the weight of the beading. Something like this could never be displayed on a mannequin because it would immediately tear from the weight of the beads. It could be displayed flat if necessary. Other times, we receive objects that are already damaged and deteriorated from use and exposure, and we accept them for their historic significance. Placing them in museum conditions is the first step towards preserving objects, and we can try to slow down the rate of deterioration. But even in the best museum environment, some objects will need treatment. In these cases, we can sometimes choose to send them to trained conservators who can stabilize or restore parts of the objects. Stabilization is a treatment designed to maintain object integrity and minimize further deterioration. Restoration is a more involved treatment intended to return a museum object to a known or assumed state or to improve its appearance. Conservation treatments are expensive, and in the past we have applied for grants to treat some of our most precious objects. In 2021, we applied for a conservation grant from the New York State Council on the Arts and the Greater Hudson Heritage Network to conserve this embroidery on silk. It was made in 1822 by Carolyn Wing when she was a 13-year-old student at the Troy Female Seminary in Troy, New York. The embroidery depicts Carolyn's interpretation of a scene from Homer's The Iliad, where Hector bids farewell to his wife and son before returning to war. Carolyn used a variety of materials to decorate the silk backing, including silk and chenille threads, pencil, ink, and pieces of gold foil. Although crafted in Troy, this work is intertwined with Huntington's development, as it was passed down to Carolyn Wing's descendants, her daughter, Mary W. Taylor, and her husband, Henry Whipple, who settled in Huntington in 1887. Wing's embroidery is an essential component of a larger collection of gifts from the Whipple family that allows the Society to teach about Huntington's early families and heritage, as well as the federal period and the development of women's education in New York. So here's the before picture. You can see the embroidery was in decent shape, but had some weaknesses and holes. It was not mounted with acid-free materials, and the original frame was disintegrating. We received the grant to send the embroidery to conservator Paul Himmelstein in the city. So here's the finished result. He spent several months stabilizing the fragile silk backing and reframing it with archival materials. We also had someone replicate the original frame, and it's now on display in the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Building if you want to go see it in person. So back to safely storing the collection. Most of our collections are stored in an insulated and fireproof vault with covered windows to minimize exposure to natural light, with an HVAC system and dehumidifier so that we can monitor and control the temperature and relative humidity. We have sticky traps for bugs throughout the houses and storage spaces. Most objects are stored in special archival boxes wrapped in archival tissue paper, while others are stored on shelves. The archival materials are acid-free, meaning that they've been treated to remove harmful acids that could cause further damage to the objects they come in contact with. The acid can migrate from the storage materials to the objects and cause yellowing and decay. Purchasing the correct acid-free materials can be expensive, which is another reason why we can't accept everything that people want to donate to us, even though we may want to. Our priority is making sure that we are doing the best for the objects we are entrusted with and not stretching ourselves too thin. Each box is numbered, and there's an inventory sheet inside each one with a description and condition of the objects inside. Each of the aisles, shelves, or other units have a name or number so that we can locate the boxes within the vault. We have 2 carts and a metal grid on the wall for storing framed objects like paintings, photographs, prints, or samplers. We try to have a piece of foam core as cushioning between the frames so that they don't hit each other. The grid on the wall is especially good for ornate frames that might get damaged by hitting other paintings on the shelves. But obviously, we can't just keep everything in boxes forever. Otherwise, what's the point of having the collection? Our duty as a museum is to preserve these objects, but also to provide for access to them. Things can still be exhibited using specific procedures designed to minimize damage. Most of these techniques are common sense, like handling and transporting things carefully. We don't want to damage objects en route to the museum. The other main thing is object security. It's best to put things behind a barrier, like plexiglass, so that there is a protective barrier between curious hands as well as the outside environment, which can include accumulated pollutants like dust. We also want to avoid excessive exposure to light, which is difficult in a museum like ours, which is full of windows. Choosing to put anything on exhibit will obviously cause some light exposure, but we try to limit it by placing it carefully in the museum and limiting the length of the exhibit. Many of the plexiglass cases also have a UV film for extra protection. Costumes and textiles are the type of objects that can be the most fragile and most impacted by agents of deterioration, and therefore require the most planning and thought. So I thought I'd go into that a little bit more. I wanted to share a technique that I employed for an exhibit last year on Long Island textiles. This exhibit included coverlets, which some of you may have heard me talk about already. Coverlets are woven blankets made of wool and cotton, and they are very heavy. In the close-up picture in the center here, you can see that this one was previously displayed hanging with some kind of pinholes. You can see that the pins and the weight of the coverlet caused the top edge to get distorted and left holes behind. I didn't want to repeat that process, but it was important to me that visitors got to see an entire coverlet laid out, since I had to display many of the other ones folded in cases. So I sewed a muslin tube to the back of the coverlet using a herringbone stitch along the top and bottom, which evenly distributed the weight across the whole piece, rather than at the specific points where the pins were in the past. I sewed the stitch with a curved needle, which you can see in the left side picture, so that I was only catching one layer of fabric and the stitches wouldn't be seen on the other side. These coverlets are in double weave, so they're actually 2 separate layers woven together. We then attached 5 very strong magnets to the top edge of the wall where I wanted to hang it, using metal plates. I used a flat metal bar and slid it through the muslin tube on the back of the coverlet. The bar is secured to the magnets to hold the coverlet in place. And here's the result. With this method, the magnets were only touching the muslin tube and there was no stress or pressure on the coverlet itself. This method worked extremely well, and I plan to use it to hang large textiles in the future. Putting costumes on display can also be a complicated process. There are special museum-style mannequins that are meant to fit under a variety of historical silhouettes. They also have arms, legs, and heads that come off. Regular department store mannequins or dress forms are too stiff and are often shaped for modern fashions, so they don't really work well with most historic clothing. On the far left is a picture of the mannequin prior to dressing. Historic garments were made for specific people with specific body shapes and sizes that conform to the fashionable silhouette of the era. We use stockings on the top and bottom of the mannequin to hold stuffing in place so that we can pad the mannequins out to the correct size and shape. The second picture shows a bodice on the mannequin without any padding. You can see that it just kind of hangs there and obviously doesn't fit correctly. Third picture shows the mannequin with stuffing around the waist, bust, and arms so that it will correctly fit inside the bodice and skirt. I ended up taking out some of the padding in front. Sometimes it takes a little back and forth until you get the correct size and shape. The final two images show the garment from the side and the front. You can see that it fits correctly and looks like the dress is being worn by a body rather than just hanging loosely from the shoulders. This mannequin hung out in the Victorian parlor at the Conklin House for a few months, and it was a welcome addition to the space. So I hope you can understand by now that collections care is a process, not a singular action. It is the first line of defense to prevent deterioration and ensure the long-term survival of the objects in our care. So thank you for listening, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to chat about them now.
So everyone can unmute themselves now if they'd like. I saw one question from, I think it was Sue Glazier. Emily, it says, what damage percentage would you estimate to be found in old donations?
Yes,
and removed?
Right.
Sue,
Right. So obviously there had to have been materials that were donated early on in the early 1900s, and they weren't preserved the right way. So how much would you estimate is damaged than you've removed?
It's hard to say exactly. I mean, I've only been here about 3 years now. I'd say in that time we've looked most closely at the textile collection, and now we're going through our costume collection. It's not a very large percentage. There still are a lot of things that are in exhibitable condition and good enough condition to keep and study. I mean, maybe 5%. That might even be too high. But we've had good volunteers over the years, especially with the costumes. They're stored in the attic, which is not an ideal space for costumes because of the fluctuations in temperature and humidity. But the ladies of the attic have been up there working for quite a few years to get everything in boxes. So even though it isn't all in the database and we don't have all the information about it, it is all now being preserved pretty well. But we're going through and weeding things out when we can, but it's hard to put an exact number on it.
I had another question. Where did you go to school for this, and what degrees do you have?
Yeah, so I have
in art history and what?
I have an undergraduate degree in American Studies and Art History from Skidmore College in Saratoga. And then I went to FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in the city. My program was in fashion and textile studies, kind of conservation, curation. So I had hands-on, but also research methods. So it was a little bit of everything.
Yeah, because you know so much. And Stephanie, do you would you know how many years they've had a curator for this?
At our organization. Well, prior to that, really, Robin and Toby were, am I correct, Robin? Were really doing the curatorial.
We had many years ago we had a paid curator, and I guess times changed and she left, and there weren't funds to hire another curator and collections manager. So for a while it was Toby and the ladies of the attic, and then Toby kind of passed it down to me. And then when we got Emily, she was doing such a fabulous job that she became our full-time curator. So we're really fortunate to have her, and she's really taken the level of the care of our collection to such a high degree. It's in a short time. It's really fabulous, and I look forward to see what else she does in the future with it.
There's another question down here from Galena. Do you have to treat garments before you pack them in the boxes? Because Galena is a textile artist, a local artist, and she's done a lot in this field. So that's her question.
We don't really do any treatments per se before we pack them, but we do make sure that they're not contaminated with anything before we bring them into the rest of the collection. So, we do a good check over for if there's any pests, like moths are, a big problem that we wouldn't want to introduce into our storage spaces. Sometimes we'll take things, we got a bunch of samplers recently that are, they're framed, they're in stable condition. But that's something that's on our list that we'd probably like to apply for a grant to get conserved. So we don't really do too much other than just making sure objects are stable and that it's something we want to keep up front. But, there's always the chance down the line that we could get some, more professional treatment down the line.
Can I have another question?
Could I just interject there? It's probably not well known that once something has been accessioned, we have to follow certain guidelines on what we do to that object. So in other words, it'd be tempting to just jump in and throw it in the washing machine or something like that, do some home repairs, but we really have to be careful and make sure that it goes through a professional person that can conserve it. I mean, we'll do some things, obviously, you know, the simple things that won't do more harm, but we have to be really careful that we don't do more harm in the process of trying to make it better.
And Galena, you had a question?
Yeah. I had a pleasure actually to be yesterday at your storage. It was amazing, really. I didn't realize how much, beauty you have in the boxes. And it's a shame that nobody could see that. So the preservations of the garments like that, like for instance, you're probably familiar, Stephanie, in FIT, they all hang, and once in a while they pull this out and show to people. We have a treasure, really big treasure in Huntington. I don't know if we could work together with different museums for displays, but I think it should be at least maybe like a 10, 20 pieces like FIT or Metropolitan, Museum does exhibitions. We could treat them nicely. We could really, get rid of the wrinkles and stuff like that and put them on a display, and people could come to see them, because I don't know. I just feel so ashamed that we couldn't show this. It's such a beauty in there. And I didn't realize how much, I could photograph and put this on my project right now to maybe have like a fashion sketch, and we could sell it. So
Yeah, well, I mean, that is something we're always working towards. It does take a lot of work to exhibit
Right.
costumes. So we're a pretty small team here, but the exhibit that I'm working on now, it's gonna all be about flowers and fashion and decorative arts, and there are gonna be several pieces from our costume collection on display. We also have 2 dresses that are on loan to the Nassau County Museum of Art right now for their Gilded Age exhibit. So we're also anxious to, get our pieces out there and get eyes on them, because it is a great treasure that we have. But yeah, we're doing all that we can, and I'm happy you got to see some of them.
right. See, in Roslyn, you have only 2 pieces, right? Am I wrong?
Yes, yeah, just 2
But
dresses.
we have a Vanderbilt museum, so it's a Gilded Age. We could, maybe have little room and, display 10 of them or something, because it's a treasure. It really, I was touching yesterday, I almost tear myself. You see this, textiles, and Robin keep showing me these little pieces. It's really amazing, really amazing. I'm so in awe, after visiting yesterday.
Good, good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's
Thank you,
something
Galena.
that down the road, Galena, and in the past, they have had a lot of exhibits of I mean, our past exhibits in Kassam, I know there was a whole, like a wedding and lingerie, like that was a couple of years back, and also in Soldiers and Sailors. So as we, with Emily now and the ladies at it coming back after COVID, and now bringing in Dory Joe, and other expert volunteers like yourself, we might be able to do some other larger scale exhibits in 2025, because this year we're kind of planned out what we're doing. But I do agree that when we can show our collection and also have it be borrowed and shown in other places, that's wonderful to be able to share with the community. So it's something that we'll definitely want to do more of with our small and mighty team. But it does take a little bit of effort, and also making sure whoever you lend it to really knows what they're doing, right? Emily, from what we worry about all these insurances and documents. We're like, we talk to our insurance company about things as well when we loan something out, to make sure that where it's going has adequate coverage, and because these things really can't be replaced. I mean, a lot of them are
Right.
one of a kind items, if I'm correct on that.
Right. Well, use me if you can. If I could help with something, at least I will be documenting in my illustrations this dresses and garments that I saw yesterday. I'm looking forward to see more and photograph more and maybe do more illustrations.
Well, the ladies that
And
could use
we
you.
hope to have Galena on board. We look forward to your help, because
Yeah, it
we
was a
are
pleasure.
limited in what we can do. And a
Yeah.
lot of the time that we've spent recently where we haven't been displaying as much has been put into maintaining and preserving. So, you know, that's kind of our priority first, and then go on to show them once we know they're in good shape and we've got everything on the computer and photographed.
Right.
Well, there's also a question here about Judith was asking, what is the process of becoming a volunteer? Are you looking for certain backgrounds or skill sets? If you were to volunteer, I guess in this lane, Judith, if you were with the ladies of the attic or doing preservation, that would be for Emily, I guess, or Robin to, or Lillian to answer, because they're more in that lane.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking for people to help out with specific projects. If you're, you know, particularly good at researching things or writing things, or want to get together, you know, to meet with the group that's established and photographing things, you know, shoot us an email. Happy to talk out, you know, what you might be interested in, what we could use help with. So yeah, so just send us an email. We can chat.
So the email, you could either send it to info@huntingtonhistoricalsociety.org, or if you want to email Emily directly, it could be collections@huntingtonhistoricalsociety.org. And, you know, if you can't get all that, it's a long one, just call the office and we'll direct you to, you know, whoever is appropriate to you know, for you to get some volunteer experience. As we are trying to build up some of the ladies that we had in the past, and I say ladies because it was ladies of the attic, some of the people that were with us didn't return after COVID for various reasons. So it's nice to have some fresh volunteers, people who have time. I could put those contacts in the chat. Yes, I can. I don't know if there's any other.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
So I have a question about the dates. How recent? I'm not exactly sure how to say that. How recent do you accept items? How do you determine the date of an item that you accept?
Yeah, it's like, are you saying would we accept like a shirt from, you know, 2015?
Right.
Yeah. We don't have a specific cutoff date. I think maybe the most recent thing we probably have, I feel like we have some things from like the 1980s. That's probably the bulk of, you know, we have some dresses, we have a board game that was like a, you know, a Monopoly style board game with businesses from downtown. I'd say, you know, probably 40, 50 years is a good kind of breadth of time. I know Karen in the archives accepts things more recently, like she'll collect flyers from different events that we have or different events in town. So it does kind of depend on the, you know, if we can tell that it's going to be something of significance, you know, right away, we might keep it. But generally a couple decades, I say, is a good cushion for accepting things and kind of weeding out what may or may not be most important.
Glena's asking, would you like something from Russian textiles?
No.
It would have to
depends on
be
the
something that
connection.
would fit into our collecting scope. So while there are beautiful textiles from Russia, it would have to be somehow that fits into Huntington's history. If it was, you know, worn or used by a person who lived in Huntington in some kind of way. Just as long as it has that connection to, you know, local history is really how we'd be most interested in having it.
Okay, it's no local history, but I was thinking I have the old lace from Vologda, which is kind of famous. It's belonged to my grandmother, and also have embroidery from, I would say, 1930s. It's basically textile pieces, but no, it's no relation to Huntington, unfortunately. I don't know if you're just interested to see how it's done in there.
Yeah, I mean, I
think we
personally
would love
would be
to
cool
see
to
them
see.
for sure.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I could donate because I was cleaning my, you know, my studio, and I have a lot of things that I don't want to keep anymore. So I would like to, you know, give to somebody.
Does the museum accept items from all over the town of Huntington? So it'd be like Huntington Station and South Huntington and anywhere in the town of Huntington.
Yep, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and usually, Judith, the best thing to do is if someone wants to donate something, they should take pictures of it and give
Sure.
Emily some kind of size dimensions, just so that she can assess whether it's something that's going to add to our collection. We may have a lot of that. It might be very heavy in one lane in our collection where if we may not be able to accession that. We might have to, or we might take it and deaccession something that's similar if your item is in better condition. Is that correct, Emily? I've learned this
Yeah.
terminology.
Yeah,
But even Galena, for you, if there's something, even it's something that, we could do a display, like, if we're doing something that's similar from a Huntington perspective, and then, from a European perspective, that might be an interesting something as a talk or a workshop or something, how different things are made and in different cultures or different at the same time period, but in different cultures. Yes, that's something we could think about to have a conversation if people are interested in textiles in general. That could be a nice get together in the barn as well, or in the museum. So
Oh, you have a good brain. I'm
yeah.
into it. Okay, great.
Yeah, because I know you're into textiles, so talking about them, as a few people on this call, on this Zoom are, for the love of textiles. So that would be kind of nice, even just on a personal level, to share these things and what people have from their own personal, their own personal families, and how you came in to receive those, and the kind of the history of them and your own family is kind of an interesting talk as well. So
Great, thank you.
so anything else, ladies or gentlemen, if there's any gentlemen on the call?
yeah.
Very
Great
interesting.
job, Emily. I really enjoyed,
Thank you.
you really explained everything so well.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
Thank you so much.
Right. And thank you
Yeah,
for everyone for
thanks for coming.
participating and taking the time, and Emily for preparing. And this will be up on our YouTube channel. So if any friends of yours or family didn't get to sit in today, we'll put it up so that people can enjoy and hear about what Emily does. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day, and we
Thank
hope to see you
you.
at one of
Thanks,
our
You
events
too.
everybody.
soon.
Thank
Bye.